North Atlantic Ocean, April 15th, 1912. 2:20 in the morning. The water is black and calm, smooth as glass, cold enough to kill in minutes. Above, the stars are brilliant, undimmed by moon or clouds. The night is almost supernaturally clear. And rising from the water, at an angle that defies physics and reason, is the stern of the largest moving object ever built by human hands. RMS Titanic, 882 feet long, 46,000 tons. The most luxurious passenger liner in the world. Unsinkable, they said. A floating palace, a triumph of modern engineering. The stern is pointing almost straight up now. 15,000 tons of steel and machinery balanced on a fulcrum of freezing water. Inside, furniture is crashing. Boilers are tearing loose. People who did not make it to lifeboats are tumbling through grand staircases and collapsing corridors, falling toward bulkheads that have become floors. On the water, in lifeboats barely half full, 700 survivors watch. They can hear the screaming. The sound of 1,500 people drowning carries across calm water with terrible clarity. But the lifeboats do not go back. The survivors are afraid the drowning will swamp them, pull them under. So they row away, and they listen. At 2:20 a.m., the stern slips beneath the surface. The screaming continues for another 15 or 20 minutes as people freeze to death in a water that is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Then silence. Just the sound of waves lapping against lifeboats. The stars shining down on the largest maritime disaster in peacetime history. The ship that could not sink is gone. 2 hours and 40 minutes after striking an iceberg. On her maiden voyage, carrying 2,224 passengers and crew. Only 706 will survive. Over 1,500 dead, bodies floating in the darkness. Most will never be recovered. This is not a story about an accident. It is a story about arrogance. About what happens when human beings believe their technology has conquered nature. About the cost of speed and luxury and the relentless drive to be the biggest, the fastest, the best. About how the smallest decisions, the ones that seem insignificant at the time, can kill hundreds of people. The Titanic's story does not begin on April 14th, 1912. It begins years earlier, in boardrooms and shipyards, where men made choices. Choices about lifeboats and watertight compartments and how fast to sail through ice fields. Choices that seemed reasonable, even smart, right up until the moment the ship hit the iceberg. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back. Not to the sinking, but to the ambition that built the ship in the first place. Part 2. The race to build giants. In the early 1900s, transatlantic travel was dominated by steamship companies competing for passengers and prestige. The ocean liners were not just transportation. They were symbols of national power, engineering marvels, floating cities that connected Europe and America. The British shipping company White Star Line was losing that competition. Their rival, Cunard Line, had recently launched 2 ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, both faster and more luxurious than anything White Star owned. Cunard was winning passengers, winning headlines, winning the race. White Star needed a response. In 1907, the company's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, met with Lord William Peary, chairman of Harland and Wolff, the Belfast shipyard that built White Star's vessels. Together, they conceived a plan. White Star would build 3 ships, larger and more luxurious than anything afloat. They would not compete on speed. Cunard had won that race. Instead, they would compete on size and luxury. Floating palaces for the wealthy. The ships would be called Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, sister ships, nearly identical in design, would be over 880 feet long, 46,000 tons, capable of carrying over 2,500 passengers and crew. Construction began on the Olympic in December 1908. The Titanic followed in March 1909. The shipyard at Belfast was transformed. New gantries were built, massive steel structures tall enough to accommodate ships that dwarfed anything previously constructed. Thousands of workers, riveters, platers, carpenters, electricians labored in shifts around the clock. Building the Titanic took 3 years and cost £1.5 million. Roughly £150 million in today's money, or about $200 million. The ship was a marvel of engineering. A double-bottomed hull, 16 watertight compartments separated by bulkheads that could be closed remotely from the bridge. The design allowed the ship to stay afloat even if 4 compartments were flooded. This is where the myth of unsinkability began, not from White Star's official advertising, which never used that exact word, but from the press and the public. Magazines called her practically unsinkable. Naval architects described her as the safest ship ever built. The watertight compartments seemed to guarantee survival even in the worst scenarios. But there was a flaw in the design. A flaw so obvious in hindsight, it seems criminal. The watertight bulkheads did not extend all the way to the top of the hull. They stopped several decks below. This meant that if the ship tilted forward, water could spill over the top of one compartment into the next. The compartments were not sealed. They were just partitions. And if enough of them flooded, the ship would sink. The designers knew this. But they calculated that no realistic accident would breach more than 4 compartments. The ship could survive that. So the bulkheads were left open at the top, a cost-saving measure. A reasonable engineering decision. It was also a death sentence for 1,500 people. Part 3. Luxury and Lies. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a spectacle. White Star marketed her as the pinnacle of Edwardian luxury. First-class passengers paid the equivalent of $60,000 to $100,000 in today's money for a one-way ticket. For that price, they got accommodations that rivaled the finest hotels in the world. The first-class dining saloon could seat over 500 people. The room was paneled in oak with elaborate plasterwork on the ceiling. The grand staircase, immortalized in films, was topped with a glass dome and lined with carved wood. It descended 6 decks, connecting the ship's most luxurious spaces. First-class cabins ranged from standard rooms to suites that included sitting rooms, private promenades, and bathrooms with heated towel racks. The ship had a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a gymnasium with the latest exercise equipment, a squash court. There was a Parisian-style cafe, a smoking room with leather chairs and mahogany panels, a reading room for women. Second-class accommodations on the Titanic were equivalent to first class on most other ships. Passengers had access to libraries, smoking rooms, and dining areas that would have impressed travelers on any vessel. The ship was designed to appeal not just to the ultra-wealthy, but to the growing middle class that could afford transatlantic travel. Third-class steerage was more basic. But even here, White Star made an effort. The rooms were clean. The food was decent. Compared to the overcrowded, unsanitary steerage conditions on older ships, the Titanic's third class was relatively humane. But luxury and engineering are not the same thing. And while White Star invested heavily in making the ship beautiful, they made critical decisions that prioritized aesthetics and profit over safety. The most infamous decision involved lifeboats. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, 16 standard wooden lifeboats, and 4 collapsible Engelhardt boats. Combined, they could hold 1,178 people. The ship was designed to carry over 3,300 passengers and crew. This was not illegal. British Board of Trade regulations, written in 1894, required ships over 10,000 tons to carry 16 lifeboats. The regulations had not been updated to account for ships the size of the Titanic. White Star exceeded the legal requirement by adding 4 collapsibles. But the ship's designers had originally planned for 64 lifeboats, enough for everyone on board. The plan was rejected. The lifeboats cluttered the deck. They blocked the view from promenade areas. They reminded passengers of danger, which undermined the message that the ship was unsinkable. So the lifeboats were reduced. Cost savings, aesthetics, marketing, all more important than the possibility that the unsinkable ship might actually sink. The decision was made by men in boardrooms who would never sail on the Titanic. And it was approved by regulators who trusted that modern ships were safe enough that full lifeboat capacity was unnecessary. After all, the lifeboats were not meant to save everyone. They were meant to ferry passengers from a sinking ship to rescue vessels that would arrive quickly in the heavily trafficked North Atlantic. The flaw in that logic would become apparent at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, when the Titanic sank in the middle of an empty ocean with no rescue ship in sight. Part 4. The Maiden Voyage, April 10th, 1912. Southampton, England. The Titanic is ready for her maiden voyage. She has completed sea trials, been declared seaworthy, and is now boarding passengers for the journey to New York. The ship is not full. Only about half the berths are occupied. First class has many empty cabins. The timing is not ideal. It is early in the season. Some wealthy travelers have delayed crossing until later in the spring. But the passenger list still includes some of the richest people in the world. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in America, is traveling with his pregnant 18-year-old wife, Madeleine. Benjamin Guggenheim, mining magnate. Isidore and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store. Margaret Brown, later known as the Unsinkable Molly Brown, a socialite and philanthropist. The ship also carries hundreds of immigrants in third class. Irish families heading to America. Scandinavians, Eastern Europeans. People seeking new lives, carrying everything they own in trunks and suitcases. For them, the Titanic represents hope, escape, opportunity. Captain Edward Smith is in command. He is 59 years old, near retirement. This is supposed to be his final voyage, a ceremonial last command of White Star's greatest ship before he retires with honor. Smith is experienced. He has commanded ships for decades. He is trusted, respected. But Smith is also a company man. He follows orders. And the orders from White Star are clear. Make good time, impress the passengers, arrive in New York on schedule or early. Show the world that the Titanic is not just luxurious, but fast. The ship departs Southampton at noon. She stops briefly in Cherbourg, France, to pick up more passengers. Then Queenstown, Ireland, for a final boarding. By the evening of April 11th, the Titanic is steaming west across the Atlantic at nearly full speed, 22.5 knots. Fast for a ship her size. The voyage is smooth. The weather is calm. Passengers settle into routines. The wealthy dine in the first-class saloon, attend concerts, socialize. Second-class passengers enjoy their libraries and smoking rooms. Third-class passengers gather in common areas, playing music, dancing, making friends. No one is worried. Why would they be? They are on the safest ship ever built. Unsinkable, a miracle of modern engineering. By April 14th, the ship is 4 days into the voyage. New York is less than 2 days away. The weather remains calm, but the temperature is dropping. The wireless operators receive ice warnings from other ships. Ice fields ahead, icebergs spotted. Proceed with caution. The warnings are delivered to the bridge. Captain Smith sees them. He acknowledges them. He does not reduce speed. This is not recklessness. This is standard practice. Captains routinely sail through ice fields at full speed during daylight or under clear conditions. The night of April 14th is extraordinarily clear. The stars are brilliant. Visibility is excellent. The lookouts in the crow's nest can see for miles. What they cannot see is an iceberg with no moon to illuminate it, floating in waters so calm and there are no waves breaking against its base. On a normal night, lookouts watch for the white foam of waves hitting ice. On April 14th, the water is like glass. The iceberg is invisible until it is too close. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet sees something ahead, a dark shape. He rings the bell 3 times. Iceberg dead ahead. He calls the bridge. 6th Officer James Moody answers. Moody relays the warning to First Officer William Murdoch, who is in command of the bridge. Murdoch orders hard to starboard, reversing the engines to slow the ship. The Titanic begins to turn. Slowly. A ship this size does not turn quickly. The iceberg looms closer. For a moment, it seems the ship will clear it. Then the submerged portion of the iceberg scrapes along the starboard side below the waterline. The collision is not dramatic. No violent crash. Just a grinding, scraping sound. Chunks of ice fall onto the forward deck. Passengers barely feel it. Many do not wake up. But below the waterline, the iceberg has opened a wound in the ship's hull. Not a long gash, as people later imagine. A series of narrow openings, separated by intact sections of hull. The openings are small, but they extend across 6 watertight compartments. The ship can survive 4 flooded compartments, not 6. Water begins pouring in. Slowly at first, then faster. The forward compartments flood. The bow begins to sink. And the ship that cannot sink is doomed. Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, who is aboard for the maiden voyage, inspect the damage. Andrews does the calculations. He knows the ship's design. He knows what 6 flooded compartments mean. He tells Smith the ship has an hour, maybe 2. Then she will sink. It is 11:50 p.m. The Titanic has struck the iceberg 10 minutes ago. Most passengers do not know anything is wrong, and the ship is carrying lifeboats for barely half the people on board. Part 5. The Lifeboats and the Lies. 12:05 a.m., April 15th. 25 minutes after the collision, Captain Smith gives the order to uncover the lifeboats and prepare to abandon ship. The crew begins rousing passengers. Stewards knock on cabin doors. "Life jackets, please. Come to the boat deck. Bring your life jackets." The tone is calm. No panic, no urgency. Because the crew has been told not to alarm passengers unnecessarily. The Titanic is unsinkable. This is just a precaution. Many passengers do not take it seriously. They are warm in their cabins. The ship feels stable. Some refuse to go on deck. It is freezing outside. The night air is bitter. Why stand in the cold for a drill? Others come to the boat deck in evening wear. Men in tuxedos. Women in gowns and jewelry. No coats, no warm clothing. They expect to be back inside within the hour. This is an inconvenience, nothing more. The crew begins loading lifeboats, women and children first. This is not a law, not a regulation, but it is maritime tradition. And in a crisis, tradition becomes protocol. The first lifeboat, number 7, is launched at 12:45 a.m. It is designed to hold 65 people. It leaves with 28. The crew is not sure how many people the lifeboats can safely hold while being lowered. They are afraid of overloading, afraid the boats will buckle or the ropes will snap. So they launch half-full boats, again and again. Lifeboat after lifeboat leaves with empty seats. The crew calls for women and children. In first class, many women refuse to leave their husbands. They do not believe the ship is really sinking. They do not want to get into a small boat and be lowered 70 feet to the freezing ocean. Some men take advantage of the confusion. They slip into boats. They disguise themselves. They argue that if there are empty seats and no more women nearby, men should be allowed to board. Some officers allow it. Others refuse and threaten to shoot any man who tries. In third class, the situation is worse. The passengers are deep in the ship. Many do not speak English. The stewards are trying to guide them to the boat deck. But the route is confusing. Gates that separate third class from the upper decks are locked, not to trap passengers, but as part of normal immigration procedures to keep steerage passengers separated until arrival in New York. Some stewards unlock the gates. Others do not know where the keys are. Third-class passengers wander through corridors, lost, trying to find their way up. By the time many of them reach the boat deck, the lifeboats are gone. By 1:40 a.m., most of the lifeboats have been launched. Collapsible boats are being prepared. The bow is submerged. Water is creeping up the forward decks. The ship is tilting noticeably now. And there are still over 1,500 people on board. The wireless operators have been sending distress calls since midnight. CQD, the old distress signal, and SOS, the new one. Several ships respond. The closest is the Carpathia, 58 miles away. She's steaming toward the Titanic at full speed, but she will not arrive for nearly 4 hours. There is another ship much closer. The Californian, a cargo vessel, is stopped in the ice field less than 20 miles away. Her wireless operator went to bed at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the Titanic struck the iceberg. The Californian's crew sees rockets being fired from the Titanic, distress signals, but they do not understand what they mean. They think it is a celebration. They do not wake the wireless operator. They do not investigate. 20 miles away, the Californian sits in the ice, her crew asleep, while 1,500 people are dying. On the Titanic, the end is approaching. The stern is rising out of the water. The bow is nearly submerged. The ship's designers did not anticipate this, did not design the ship to withstand the stress of being tilted at such an extreme angle. The hull is bending, weakening. The band, the ship's musicians, have been playing on the boat deck for over an hour. Ragtime, waltzes, anything to keep passengers calm. As the ship tilts further, they keep playing. The story goes that their final song was "Nearer, My God, to Thee," a hymn. Whether that is true or legend, no one knows. But the band plays until the water reaches them. Then they stop, and they die. By 2:15 a.m., the last lifeboat is gone. 1,500 people remain on the ship. They crowd toward the stern, climbing as the bow sinks. They pray, they scream. They jump into the water, hoping to swim to a lifeboat or find floating debris. The water is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, a person can survive 15 to 30 minutes before hypothermia shuts down the body. Most will die in less than 20. At 2:18 a.m., the ship's lights flicker and go out. The boilers have flooded. The engineers who stayed below, keeping the power running so the wireless could send distress calls and the lights could help people find lifeboats, are dead. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic breaks apart. The stress on the hull is too great. The ship snaps just forward of the third funnel. The stern bobs upright, floating for a moment. Then it slips beneath the water. The yeast, screaming, is unbearable. 1,500 people in the water, freezing, drowning, calling for help that will not come. In the lifeboats, 700 survivors listen. Some row away, afraid the drowning will pull them under. A few lifeboats return to search for survivors. They find a handful. Most of the bodies are already floating face down, dead from hypothermia. By 3 a.m., the screaming has stopped. The ocean is silent except for the sound of waves. The Titanic is gone, and the survivors, drifting in lifeboats under brilliant stars, wait for rescue. Part 6. The Carpathia and the Count. 4:10 a.m., the Carpathia arrives. She has been steaming at full speed, her captain, Arthur Rostron, pushing the ship beyond her normal limits. Rostron received the Titanic's distress call just after midnight. He immediately changed course and ordered every available man to prepare for rescue operations. The Carpathia's passengers, mostly unaware of the disaster, wake to find their ship stopped in an ice field, surrounded by lifeboats full of freezing, traumatized survivors. The rescue takes hours. The lifeboats are scattered across miles of ocean. The Carpathia's crew lowers rope ladders and cargo nets. Children are hauled up in bags. Women climb the ladders, numb with cold. Men are pulled aboard, barely conscious. By 8:30 a.m., all the survivors are aboard. 706 people. Captain Rostron holds a brief service for the dead, then turns the Carpathia toward New York. The survivors are in shock. Many are injured. Frostbite, hypothermia, trauma. The Carpathia's passengers give up their cabins, their clothes, their food. The ship's doctors work around the clock. News of the disaster is already spreading. The wireless operators on the Carpathia are overwhelmed with messages. Newspapers demanding information, families desperate for news. The world is stunned. The Unsinkable ship has sunk. Over 1,500 people are dead. The Carpathia arrives Votsinain, West New York on April 18th. Tens of thousands of people line the docks, reporters, families, curiosity seekers. The survivors disembark into a nightmare of flashbulbs and shouted questions. Some are met by family. Others have no one. The bodies of the dead are still in the ocean. Recovery ships are being dispatched, but most of the bodies will never be found. Families are left with uncertainty, no closure, just the knowledge that their loved ones are gone, somewhere in the cold North Atlantic. Inquiries begin immediately. The U.S. Senate launches an investigation. The British Board of Trade follows. The questions are obvious. How did this happen? Who is responsible? Why were there not enough lifeboats? Why was the ship traveling so fast through an ice field? Why did the California not respond? The testimonies reveal a cascade of failures. Captain Smith ignored ice warnings. White Star prioritized luxury over safety. The Board of Trade regulations were outdated. The Californian's wireless operator went to bed early. The crew did not know how to load lifeboats efficiently. But beneath the specific failures is a larger truth. The Titanic sank because the people who built her believed technology had conquered nature. They believed a ship could be unsinkable. They believed the rules that applied to other ships did not apply to the Titanic. And 1,500 people paid for that arrogance with their lives. Part 7. The Class Divide in Death. The survival statistics from the Titanic reveal an uncomfortable truth. Your chances of surviving depended almost entirely on your ticket class and your gender. Of the 144 first-class women on board, 140 survived, 97%. Of the 93 second-class women, 80 survived, 86%. Of the 165 third-class women, 76 survived, 46%. For men, the numbers are even more stark. Of the 175 first-class men, 57 survived, 33%. Of the 168 second-class men, 14 survived, 8%. Of the 462 third-class men, 75 survived, 16%. First-class passengers had access to the boat deck. They were close to the lifeboats. Stewards helped them. Many spoke English and understood the urgency. They had money, status, confidence. They were used to being prioritized. Third-class passengers were deep in the ship. Many did not speak English. They were not familiar with the ship's layout. Stewards were overwhelmed. Gates were locked. By the time many third-class passengers reached the boat deck, the lifeboats were gone. The crew prioritized women and children, but they prioritized first-class women and children first. Not explicitly, not through malice, but through proximity and access. The people closest to the lifeboats got into the lifeboats. This is not a story about evil. It is a story about systems. The Titanic's design, its procedures, its crew training, all of it assumed a hierarchy. First class, then second, then third. In an emergency, that hierarchy became a death sentence. Some third-class passengers fought their way through locked gates. Some found alternate routes. Some made it to the boat deck in time. But most did not. And the survival statistics reflect that. The crew did not fare well either. Over 680 crew members were on board. Over 200 were women, mostly stewardesses. Of the women crew, nearly all survived, prioritized under the women and children rule. Of the male crew, over 500 died. Stewards, engineers, firemen, able seamen. They stayed at their posts, kept the lights on, helped passengers, and they died. The band played until the end. All 8 musicians died. The engineers stayed in the engine rooms, keeping power running. All died. The wireless operators sent distress calls until the water reached them. 1 survived. 1 died. These were not wealthy men. They were workers, doing their jobs, following orders. And they were abandoned by a system that valued first-class passengers over crew, that assumed a disaster of this scale would never happen. Part 8. The bodies in the ocean. In the days after the sinking, ships were dispatched to recover bodies. The closest was the Mackay Bennett, a cable repair ship chartered by White Star Line. She departed Halifax, Nova Scotia, on April 17th, loaded with embalming supplies and coffins. The crew found the first bodies on April 20th. They floated in clusters, held up by life jackets. The water was still freezing. The bodies were preserved by the cold, but the scene was horrific. Over the next several weeks, the Mackay Bennett and other ships recovered 334 bodies. They were numbered, photographed, and cataloged. Personal effects were collected: jewelry, wallets, photographs, anything that might help identify the dead. The bodies of first-class passengers were embalmed and shipped to families for burial. The bodies of crew and third-class passengers, if they could not be identified, were buried at sea. The crew conducted brief services and slid the bodies over the side, weighted down to sink. Over 1,100 bodies were never recovered. They either sank immediately or drifted away from the search area. Families were left with no remains to bury, no closure. Just the knowledge that their loved ones were somewhere in the North Atlantic, lost forever. The recovered bodies revealed the brutality of hypothermia. Most showed no signs of drowning. They did not inhale water. They simply froze. The cold shut down their bodies within minutes. Their hearts stopped. Their lungs stopped. They died floating in their life jackets, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but wait for their bodies to fail. Some of the dead were children, babies even, found floating alone, separated from their parents in the chaos. The crew of the Mackay Bennett were hardened sailors, but the sight of dead children broke them. Several crew members required sedation. Others refused to continue and had to be replaced. The body recoveries continued into May. Then they stopped. The remaining bodies had either drifted too far or sunk. White Star stopped funding the searches. The families of the missing were told there was nothing more that could be done. The Titanic had not just sunk. She had taken 1,100 people with her, leaving almost no trace. Part 9. The Wreck and the Silence. For 73 years, the Titanic sat on the ocean floor, undiscovered. She sank in water over 12,000 feet deep, far beyond the reach of any technology available in 1912. Explorers searched for the wreck. Expeditions were proposed. But the ocean is vast, the search area enormous, and the technology to explore that depth did not exist until the late 20th century. In 1985, a joint French-American expedition led by Robert Ballard located the wreck. Using deep-sea submersibles equipped with sonar and cameras, they found the ship's boilers, then the hull, broken into two pieces nearly 2,000 feet apart. The images sent back to the surface were haunting. The bow sits upright, relatively intact, covered in rust and sea life. The stern is a twisted wreck, destroyed when it imploded during the descent. Debris is scattered across the ocean floor. Luggage, dishes, furniture, shoes. Thousands of shoes, all that remains of the passengers who wore them. Ballard's team found no human remains. At that depth, in those conditions, bodies decompose completely within weeks. What the cameras showed was not corpses, but ghosts. The artifacts of lives cut short, a child's toy, a porcelain doll, a gentleman's shoe. The discovery reignited public fascination with the Titanic. Books, documentaries, and eventually James Cameron's 1997 film brought the story to a new generation. The film took liberties with history, invented characters, and romanticized the disaster. But it also visualized the sinking in a way that made the tragedy real for millions of people who had only known it as a historical footnote. Subsequent expeditions have explored the wreck extensively. Artifacts have been recovered, over 5,000 items, and displayed in museums. Submersibles have descended to the wreck dozens of times, documenting its deterioration. Because the Titanic is dying a second death. The wreck is collapsing. Rust and bacteria are consuming the steel. The ship is estimated to have only a few decades before it disintegrates completely, leaving nothing but a debris field on the ocean floor. The wreck has become a gravesite. Many descendants of victims have objected to artifact recovery, arguing that the site should be left undisturbed. They see the expeditions as grave robbing. The explorers argue they are preserving history before it is lost forever. Both are right. The Titanic is both a historical artifact and a tomb, and the tension between those two truths will never be resolved. Part 10. What the Titanic reveals. The Titanic is not just a shipwreck. It is a symbol of hubris, of class inequality, of the industrial age belief that technology could solve any problem, overcome any obstacle, conquer even nature itself. The ship was built to be unsinkable. Not because the engineering made it impossible to sink, but because the designers could not imagine a scenario in which it would. They accounted for collisions, fires, mechanical failures. But they did not account for an iceberg opening 6 compartments. They did not design for the unimaginable. And when the unimaginable happened, the systems failed. Not enough lifeboats. Crew untrained in emergency procedures. Passengers unaware of the danger until it was too late. A nearby ship with her wireless turned off. Every decision that led to the disaster seemed reasonable at the time. Reduce lifeboats to improve aesthetics. Sail at full speed through ice to stay on schedule. Go to bed early because the wireless has been busy all day. Each decision, in isolation, was defensible. But together, they killed 1,500 people. This is the lesson of the Titanic. Catastrophe is rarely the result of one mistake. It is the accumulation of small failures, bad assumptions, and the arrogance to believe that the rules do not apply to you. The class divide in survival rates reveals another truth. In a crisis, systems default to hierarchy. The people with access, with knowledge, with confidence, survive. The people without do not. This was not intentional, but it was structural. And structure, in an emergency, is destiny. The Titanic also reveals the limits of technology. The ship was a marvel. The engineering was sound, but engineering cannot account for human error, cannot account for ice warnings ignored, cannot account for lifeboats launched half full because no one is sure how much weight they can hold. Technology is only as good as the people operating it, and the people operating the Titanic made mistakes. Not because they were incompetent, but because they believed the ship was unsinkable, and that belief made them careless. The wreck on the ocean floor is a monument to that carelessness, a reminder that nature does not care about your engineering. The ocean does not care about your luxury. The iceberg does not care about your schedule. The Titanic sank because human beings thought they had conquered the ocean. And the ocean proved them wrong. 1,500 people died because a ship that could not sink did. Because lifeboats that should have been there were not. Because warnings that should have been heeded were ignored. The Titanic is the most famous shipwreck in history, not because it was the deadliest, but because it was the most preventable. Every death was avoidable. Every mistake was foreseeable. The tragedy was not an accident. It was a choice to prioritize profit over safety, aesthetics over preparedness, speed over caution. And when the ship hit the iceberg, those choices became a body count. The wreck sits 12,000 feet below the surface, rusting, collapsing, returning to the ocean. In a few decades, it will be gone completely. The steel will dissolve, the artifacts will scatter, and all that will remain is the story. A story about a ship that could not sink. Until it did. If you enjoyed this investigation into the Titanic's tragic story and the truth behind the legend, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments which historical tragedy you want explored next. Every disaster has its causes. Every catastrophe has its warnings. Every tragedy has lessons we refuse to learn. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.